The heavy mahogany doors of courtroom 4B didn't just open, they were pushed wide by a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Nathaniel Sterling, the billionaire darling of the tech industry, sat at the petitioner's table, checking his Rolex and eager to finalize the paperwork so he could step out into the waiting flashbulbs with his new fiancée. But the arrogant smirk died instantly on his face when his soon-to-be ex-wife, Chloe, finally walked down the aisle. She wasn't carrying a briefcase filled with desperate, last-minute demands. She was holding a velvet-draped infant car seat, and nestled inside was a 4-month-old boy with the unmistakable, piercing blue eyes of the Sterling bloodline. Before the explosive headlines, the leaked court transcripts, and the absolute destruction of his corporate empire, Nathaniel and Chloe Sterling were Silicon Valley's quiet royalty. They had built Oratech from the ground up, starting in a cramped, unheated apartment in San Jose. Chloe was the brilliant, pragmatic architect of the software's core algorithm, while Nathaniel was the charismatic visionary who could sell a life raft to a fish. For 5 years, their marriage was a fortress. They were partners in every sense of the word, balancing each other's flaws with a quiet, unconditional devotion. But billion-dollar valuations have a funny way of eroding loyalty. When Oratech went public, the influx of wealth and media attention acted like a corrosive acid on the foundation of their relationship. Nathaniel stopped being the man who would bring Chloe lukewarm coffee during her late-night coding sessions. He became a fixture on financial news networks, a sought-after speaker at global summits, and a man surrounded by sycophants who told him he was a genius. Chloe, naturally introverted and utterly uninterested in the spotlight, happily stepped back to manage the philanthropic wing of their company. It was the fatal mistake of a trusting wife. Nature abhors a vacuum, and into the space Chloe left behind stepped Madeline Hayes. Madeline was hired as Oratech's new chief strategy officer. She was tall, relentlessly ambitious, and possessed a razor-sharp intellect that matched her designer wardrobe. Where Chloe offered Nathaniel grounded realism, Madeline offered him unadulterated worship mixed with high-stakes adrenaline. The shift was subtle at first. Late dinners discussing mergers, weekend retreats for executive team building, and Nathaniel's sudden obsession with upgrading his personal aesthetic. Chloe noticed the distance, the lingering scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume on his Tom Ford suits, and the changed password on his personal phone. But she told herself she was being paranoid. After all, they had built a life together. They were trying for a baby. In fact, after months of negative tests and silent disappointment, Chloe had finally started to feel the subtle, undeniable shifts in her own body. The shattering of her world occurred on a freezing Tuesday evening in late November. Chloe had just returned from the pharmacy, her heart hammering against her ribs. Tucked safely in her coat pocket was a digital pregnancy test, displaying the word she had prayed to see for 2 years: pregnant. She had hurried home, picking up a bottle of sparkling cider and 2 crystal glasses, intending to surprise Nathaniel in his home office. She found him in the office, but the atmosphere was far from celebratory. The room felt heavy, stripped of its usual warmth. Nathaniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, nursing a glass of bourbon. On his mahogany desk sat a thick, manila folder. "Nathaniel?" Chloe had asked softly, stepping into the room. "I have something to tell you. Something incredible." He didn't turn around immediately. When he did, his face was a mask of cold, detached corporate efficiency. It was the face he wore when firing underperforming executives. "Sit down, Chloe. We need to have a practical conversation." Her smile faltered. Her hand instinctually moved to her coat pocket, her fingers grazing the plastic edge of the test. "What's wrong?" "I've had my legal team draft these," he said, gesturing to the folder. "It's a petition for dissolution of marriage. A divorce, Chloe. I'm heavily compensating you, of course. The prenup dictates a flat payout of $10 million, but I've instructed them to double it. $20 million. Clean break. No media circus." The words hit her like physical blows. She stood frozen, the air knocked from her lungs. A divorce? Nathaniel, what are you talking about? We just had our anniversary. We're trying to start a family. I've outgrown this, Chloe, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. I've outgrown us. You're perfectly content staying in the background, playing house, managing charities. That's fine for you, but I need a partner who matches my velocity, someone who understands the arena I operate in. I need someone like Madeline. The name dropped like a bomb in the quiet room. Madeline. It hadn't been paranoia. It had been intuition. How long? Chloe asked, her voice trembling, though she fought to keep her chin high. 6 months, he admitted, entirely unashamed. It wasn't planned, but she understands the future of Oratech in a way you never could. She's moving into the penthouse with me. I've arranged for a luxury condo for you downtown. You can take whatever furniture you want. He was speaking to her as if she were a redundant employee being offered a generous severance package. The man she had loved, the man whose hands had trembled when he slipped a modest silver ring on her finger 5 years ago, was completely gone, replaced by a ruthless CEO terminating a contract. Chloe's grip tightened on the pregnancy test in her pocket. She looked at the cold, calculating eyes of her husband. If she told him now, if she pulled that piece of plastic out, he might stay. He might stay out of obligation. Or worse, he might try to take the child from her, using his billions and his high-powered lawyers to paint her as an unfit, emotionally unstable ex-wife. She realized, in that agonizing fraction of a second, that the baby growing inside her was no longer their child. It was hers, and she needed to protect it from the toxic empire Nathaniel had built. 20 million? Chloe whispered, her voice hardening. She let go of the test in her pocket and pulled her hand out, empty. You think 5 years of my life, my code that built your company, is worth a payout to keep me quiet? It's more than generous, Chloe. Don't make this difficult. If you try to fight me, I will bury you in litigation until you have nothing. Sign the papers, take the money, and disappear. It's the best option for both of us. Chloe looked at the divorce papers, then back at Nathaniel. The love she had harbored for him curdled into something cold and sharp. I won't sign these tonight. I will have my own attorney look at them. Nathaniel sighed, irritated by the slight inconvenience. Fine. Have your lawyer call Richard Blackwood. But don't drag this out, Chloe. You can't win against me. Without another word, Chloe turned and walked out of the office, out of their penthouse, and out of Nathaniel Sterling's life. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't cry. She just walked into the freezing night, carrying the biggest secret of his life right beneath her heart. The media narrative surrounding the split was swift, brutal, and entirely controlled by Madeline Hayes's PR machine. Silicon Valley's golden boy upgrades, the headlines sneered. Blind items painted Chloe as a frigid, reclusive housewife who couldn't keep up with her dynamic husband. Paparazzi camped outside the downtown condo Nathaniel had mentioned, waiting to snap pictures of the devastated ex-wife. But they never got a single photo. Chloe was a ghost. Within 48 hours of walking out of the penthouse, Chloe had hired a proxy to lease a secluded, rustic cabin in the heavily wooded outskirts of Portland, Oregon. She changed her phone number, scrubbed her digital footprint, and vanished from the public eye. The physical toll of her exile was immense. The first trimester brought violently exhausting morning sickness, compounded by the sheer, crushing grief of a broken marriage. She spent the long, rainy Pacific Northwest afternoons wrapped in a blanket, watching the fireplace, her hands resting on her slowly expanding stomach. But as the months wore on, the grief gave way to a hardened, unyielding resolve. She wasn't just surviving for herself anymore. She was the sole protector of her unborn son. Back in California, Nathaniel's legal team, led by the notoriously aggressive Richard Blackwood, was growing frustrated. They couldn't serve Chloe directly, forcing them to communicate solely through her newly retained legal counsel. Chloe hadn't hired a flashy celebrity lawyer. She had sought out Olivia Montgomery, a brilliant, unrelenting family law attorney known quietly in elite circles as the Billionaire Slayer. Olivia didn't care about press conferences. She cared about forensic accounting. During their first secure video call, Chloe, then 3 months pregnant, laid out the reality of her situation. I don't want his 20 million, Olivia. I want what I am legally owed as the co-creator of the original Aura Tech algorithm. And more importantly, I need full, undeniable custody of this child. Nathaniel cannot know about the baby until the final decree is sitting in front of a judge. Olivia, looking at the pale, determined woman on her screen, gave a sharp nod. The state of California has a mandatory 6-month cooling-off period for divorce anyway. Richard Blackwood thinks you're stalling for a higher payout. We are going to let him think exactly that. While they are busy parading Nathaniel and his mistress around on the cover of Forbes, my forensic team is going to rip his financials apart. Men like Nathaniel Sterling never play by the rules when they think no one is watching. For the next 6 months, the legal dance was excruciatingly slow. Blackwood sent threatening letters, citing the original prenuptial agreement, which capped Chloe's payout. Olivia parried every thrust with tedious, legally sound requests for financial discovery. Blackwood, dripping with arrogance, complied with the discovery requests, handing over thousands of pages of redacted financial records, confident that Chloe's budget attorney would never find the needle in the haystack. But Olivia's team did. By the time Chloe was in her 3rd trimester, her belly large and heavy, Olivia called with the breakthrough. "We found it," Olivia said, her voice crackling with suppressed excitement over the encrypted line. "Nathaniel didn't just cheat on you emotionally and physically, Chloe. He's been cheating you financially. 3 years ago, he established a web of offshore shell companies, primarily one in the Cayman Islands, called Apex Holdings. He's been quietly siphoning off Aura Tech equity and personal liquid assets into this entity." Chloe sat in her rocking chair, looking out at the Oregon pines. "Why? To artificially deflate his net worth on paper," Olivia explained. "And, it appears, to fund Madeline Hayes's lifestyle long before she officially joined the company. He bought her a $3 million yacht and a villa in Tuscany through Apex Holdings. But here is the fatal flaw. Chloe, by omitting Apex Holdings from the sworn financial disclosure forms he submitted to the court for this divorce, Nathaniel has committed perjury. Massive, undeniable, felony-level perjury. If we expose this, the prenup is entirely invalidated due to fraud." Chloe closed her eyes, resting a hand on her stomach. A sharp kick answered her touch. "Keep stalling, Olivia. We don't strike until the final hearing." In late August, during a rare, sweltering Portland heatwave, Chloe went into labor. She drove herself to a small, private hospital where she had registered under her maiden name. After 14 grueling hours, with only a compassionate delivery nurse to hold her hand, Chloe gave birth to a healthy, screaming baby boy. She named him Leo. Holding her son to her chest for the first time, Chloe felt tears stream down her face. Leo was perfect. He had 10 tiny fingers, a shock of dark hair, and as he opened his eyes, Chloe's breath hitched. They were a striking, vivid blue, Nathaniel's eyes. Looking at the innocent face of her child, the last lingering embers of her heartbreak vanished, replaced by an unbreakable, maternal armor. Nathaniel had thrown her away like trash, but he would never, ever be allowed to do the same to Leo. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for December 14th, exactly 1 year to the day Nathaniel had handed her the papers. The timing was almost poetic. The morning of the final hearing, the air in downtown San Francisco was crisp and biting. Inside the sprawling granite courthouse, the atmosphere outside courtroom 4B was a circus. Nathaniel Sterling stood in the corridor, looking like a man who had already conquered the world. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. Clinging to his arm was Madeline Hayes, draped in an aggressively tailored white designer pantsuit, a not-so-subtle mockery of bridal wear. They were surrounded by Richard Blackwood and a small army of junior associates carrying briefcases. "I still don't understand why the judge mandated an in-person appearance for a simple final signature," Nathaniel muttered, checking his watch. "I have a board meeting at 1. "It's just protocol, darling," Madeline purred, stroking his lapel. Once we're in there, Blackwood will crush her, she'll take the settlement, and we can finally announce our engagement tonight. Inside the courtroom, the Honorable Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense veteran of the family court system, was already seated at the bench, looking over the immense stack of files associated with Sterling v. Sterling. Olivia Montgomery sat calmly at the respondent's table, arranging her documents perfectly. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order. Nathaniel, Madeline, and their legal team strutted down the aisle and took their seats at the petitioner's table. Nathaniel glanced at the empty chair next to Olivia. "Your Honor," Richard Blackwood began, standing up and smoothing his tie. "It appears the respondent has failed to appear. Given her pattern of stalling over the last 12 months, we ask that the court enter a default judgment enforcing the prenuptial agreement and finalizing this dissolution immediately." Judge Harrison looked over his reading glasses at Olivia. "Counselor Montgomery, where is your client?" "My client is right outside, Your Honor," Olivia said smoothly, standing up. She was simply waiting for the courtroom to be sealed, as per our emergency motion filed at 8 a.m. this morning. Blackwood frowned. "Emergency motion? What emergency motion? We weren't notified. It involves sensitive information regarding a minor child, Mr. Blackwood," Olivia replied coldly. "By law, the gallery must be cleared." Nathaniel scoffed loudly. "A minor child? What is this circus, Olivia? We don't have children. Just finalize the paperwork." Judge Harrison banged his gavel lightly. "I have read the motion, Mr. Blackwood. The gallery is cleared. Bailiff, secure the doors. Counselor Montgomery, you may bring your client in." The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Nathaniel didn't turn around at first. He was busy whispering an annoyed remark to Madeline, but the sudden, absolute silence that fell over his legal team made him stop. He turned his head. Walking down the center aisle of the courtroom was Chloe. She looked entirely different from the shattered, pale woman he had thrown out a year ago. She wore a sharp, navy blue trench coat, her hair styled in a sleek bob, her posture radiating an intimidating, quiet power. But it wasn't her transformation that made Nathaniel's blood run cold. It was the infant car seat she was carrying. She walked past the petitioner's table without even glancing at Nathaniel. The scent of her perfume, something clean and unfamiliar, wafted past him. She set the car seat gently on the table next to Olivia, unclipped the velvet drape, and lifted out a baby. The child, dressed in a soft gray sweater, blinked at the bright courtroom lights and let out a soft coo. Madeline let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. Nathaniel felt the floor drop out from underneath him. He stared at the baby in Chloe's arms, the dark hair, the slope of the nose, and then the baby turned his head toward the noise, and Nathaniel looked directly into a pair of piercing, unmistakable blue eyes. His eyes. What is this?" Nathaniel stammered, his polished demeanor shattering instantly. He stood up, knocking his chair back with a loud clatter. "Chloe, whose baby is that?" Chloe looked at him, her expression a mask of absolute ice. "This is Leo, your son, born August 12th. "Objection!" Blackwood shouted, scrambling to his feet, his face red. "Your Honor, this is an outrageous ambush. There has been no mention of a pregnancy, no paternity established." "I have the paternity results right here, Your Honor," Olivia interrupted, holding up a certified document, conducted by a court-approved medical facility using the fetal DNA from the respondent and the petitioner's DNA on file from an earlier medical screening. Nathaniel Sterling is the biological father. Probability, 99.99%. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking at the document the bailiff handed him, then down at the baby. "It appears the document is in order, Mr. Blackwood. Sit down." But you didn't tell me," Nathaniel whispered, his voice hoarse, completely ignoring the judge. His eyes were glued to Leo, who was happily chewing on his own fist. "You hid my son from me for a year? You handed me divorce papers and kicked me out so you could move your mistress in," Chloe said, her voice echoing clearly in the silent courtroom. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. "I was carrying him when you told me you were paying me off to disappear. So, I disappeared. Madeline stood up, her face flushed with fury. This is a trap. She did this on purpose to extort more money. She's a gold digger. Miss Hayes, you are a guest in this courtroom. Sit down and remain silent, or I will have you removed, Judge Harrison barked. Madeline shrank back into her chair, glaring daggers at Chloe. Your Honor, Olivia Montgomery, took the floor, her voice ringing with authority. The revelation of a biological heir fundamentally alters this entire proceeding. The prenuptial agreement, Mr. Blackwood has been trying to enforce makes absolutely no provisions for child support, nor does it account for custody arrangements. Therefore, we are filing to have the prenup rendered void. That's absurd, Blackwood argued, trying to regain control. A child doesn't void a prenup regarding spousal assets. Perhaps not on its own, Olivia smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye. But fraud does. Nathaniel whipped his head around to look at Olivia. Fraud? What are you talking about? Olivia pulled a thick, bound ledger from her briefcase and dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud. Your Honor, during discovery, Mr. Sterling swore under penalty of perjury that his submitted financial disclosures were complete and accurate. They were not. We have traced over $45 million in liquid assets and Oratech stock to a hidden offshore shell company in the Caymans, known as Apex Holdings. The color completely drained from Nathaniel's face. He looked like a man who had just been shot. He looked at Blackwood, whose jaw was practically on the floor. Blackwood hadn't known. Nathaniel had hidden it from his own lawyer. Furthermore, Olivia continued, her voice relentless, funds from Apex Holdings were used to purchase real estate and luxury goods for his current partner, Miss Hayes, while he was still legally married to my client, utilizing marital funds without her knowledge or consent. This constitutes egregious financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty to the marriage, and perjury before this court. Judge Harrison's face darkened with fury. He looked at Nathaniel, who was now gripping the edge of his table, his knuckles white. Mr. Sterling, is this true? I can explain, Your Honor. It's a corporate entity, Nathaniel started, his silver tongue failing him for the first time in his life. You will have plenty of time to explain it to the IRS and the Securities and Exchange Commission, Mr. Sterling, Judge Harrison said coldly, because I am forwarding these findings to them immediately. The CEO's world, meticulously built on PR spin and ruthless corporate maneuvering, was collapsing in real time. He looked at the woman he had discarded, standing tall and unbothered, holding the son he had just realized he desperately wanted, and the empire he was about to lose. The sound of Judge Harrison's gavel, striking the sounding block, echoed like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. For Nathaniel Sterling, it wasn't just the end of a hearing, it was the starting pistol for his absolute destruction. As the judge swept out of the room, leaving the air thick with tension, the petitioner's table descended into chaotic mutiny. Richard Blackwood, a man who charged $2,000 an hour to never lose, was violently shoving his Mont Blanc pens and legal pads into his leather briefcase. His face was a mask of unadulterated rage. Richard, wait, Nathaniel pleaded, reaching out to grab his lawyer's sleeve. We can fix this. It's a misunderstanding. Apex Holdings is a legitimate venture capital incubator. I can show you the paperwork. Blackwood yanked his arm away, as if Nathaniel were covered in battery acid. Save it for the federal prosecutors, Nathaniel. You lied to me. You sat in my office, looked me in the eye, and signed a sworn affidavit that your financial disclosures were complete. I will not have my firm implicated in your felony perjury and securities fraud. Consider my representation officially terminated as of this second. Without a backward glance, Blackwood stormed up the center aisle, pushing through the heavy mahogany doors and disappearing into the corridor. Nathaniel stood frozen, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He turned slowly to look at Madeline, the woman who had sworn she was his equal, his ultimate partner in conquering the tech world, was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. But it wasn't sympathy in her gaze. It was cold, calculating panic. Madeline, he started, his voice trembling. You put the Tuscan villa in my name, she whispered, her voice tight and high-pitched. The yacht, the property in Malibu. You bought them through Apex Holdings and transferred the deeds to me. Nathaniel, if they trace that money, if the IRS looks at my tax returns, I was protecting our assets, Nathaniel hissed, glancing nervously across the aisle. At the respondents' table, Chloe was a portrait of serene indifference. She was gently adjusting the soft gray sweater on Leo, who was blissfully unaware of the catastrophic implosion of his father's life. Olivia Montgomery stood beside them, calmly organizing her pristine files. Chloe, please, Nathaniel said, his voice cracking as he stepped toward her. Let's just talk. Just you and me. We can sort this out. He's my son. I have a right to know my son. Olivia stepped smoothly into his path, a human shield in a tailored Chanel suit. Mr. Sterling, you have no rights. You have a paternity test and a looming federal indictment. Any further attempt to contact my client without my presence will be treated as harassment, and I will file for an immediate restraining order. Have a pleasant afternoon. Chloe didn't even look up. She picked up the car seat, holding her son close, and walked out of the courtroom. Nathaniel watched the doors swing shut, the finality of the moment crushing the air from his lungs. He had traded a loyal wife and a beautiful son for a ticking time bomb. Within 48 hours, the bomb detonated. Judge Harrison was a man of his word. The sealed transcripts and the thick ledger provided by Olivia Montgomery were overnighted directly to the regional directors of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the Internal Revenue Service, IRS. Because Oratech was a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ, Nathaniel's hidden offshore accounts weren't just a matter of marital deceit. They were a catastrophic violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. He had actively defrauded his shareholders by deflating his net worth and siphoning company equity. On a rainy Thursday morning, just 3 days after the disastrous divorce hearing, a fleet of black SUVs pulled up to the sleek, glass-fronted headquarters of Oratech in Silicon Valley. Dozens of federal agents wearing blue windbreakers with FBI and SEC emblazoned in stark yellow letters swarmed the lobby. They bypassed the frantic security guards, flashing federal warrants, and marched directly into the executive suites. Employees stood in stunned silence, holding their lattes, as agents began seizing hard drives, confiscating servers, and carrying out dozens of cardboard boxes filled with physical files from Nathaniel's private office. The news broke on financial networks before the agents even left the building. Oratech, raided by feds. CEO Nathaniel Sterling investigated for massive fraud. The chyrons blared across every major news network. The market reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Within minutes of the news breaking, Oratech's stock price plummeted by 40%. Trading was temporarily halted, but the damage was irreversible. Billions of dollars in market capitalization evaporated into thin air. Institutional investors panicked, and retail investors dumped their shares in a blind frenzy. Back in his $30 million penthouse, Nathaniel watched the financial news networks in a state of catatonic shock. His phone, which usually buzzed every 30 seconds with texts from senators, celebrities, and tech moguls, was dead silent. He was toxic. He poured himself a glass of scotch with trembling hands, the crystal decanter rattling against the glass. The front door of the penthouse clicked open, and Madeline walked in. She wasn't wearing her usual immaculate designer business attire. She was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over her face, oversized sunglasses, and a simple trench coat. "Where have you been?" Nathaniel demanded, his voice thick with alcohol and despair. "I've been calling you for hours. The board is demanding an emergency meeting at 4 o'clock. I need you to help me draft a statement. We need to spin this. We can say Apex Holdings was a rogue operation run by a former CFO." Madeline stopped in the center of the living room, taking off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red, but her expression was remarkably composed. It was the face of a predator assessing a wounded animal. "There is no we anymore, Nathaniel," she said quietly. Nathaniel froze, the glass halfway to his mouth. What are you talking about? I just spent the last 6 hours at the Federal Building downtown, Madeline replied, crossing her arms. I retained Adrian Penhaligon. He's the best white-collar criminal defense attorney on the West Coast. Why did you hire your own lawyer? We have the company's legal team. The company's legal team represents Oratech, Nathaniel. Not you, and certainly not me, Madeline shot back, her voice dripping with venom. Do you understand what you've done? The SEC is threatening me with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and tax evasion because of the properties you put in my name. I am not going to federal prison for you. Nathaniel stepped forward, dropping his glass. It shattered on the imported marble floor, but neither of them flined. Madeline, I did that for us, to build our life. You did it because you're greedy, she spat, taking a step backward. You couldn't just divorce Chloe and take the financial hit. You had to hide the money so you could have your cake and eat it too. Well, congratulations, Nathaniel. You choked on it. What did you tell them? He asked, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Everything, she said simply. Adrian brokered a proffer agreement. I've agreed to cooperate fully with the SEC and the Department of Justice. I turned over every email, every text message, and every financial transfer record I had regarding Apex Holdings. In exchange, they are granting me full immunity from prosecution. Nathaniel stared at her, the betrayal cutting deeper than anything he had experienced. She was throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. You're testifying against me. It's just business, Nathaniel. You taught me that yourself. She turned and walked toward the master bedroom. I've hired a moving company. They'll be here in an hour to pack my things. Don't contact me again. My lawyer will handle any necessary communication. Nathaniel was left standing alone in the massive, echoing penthouse, surrounded by the shattered glass of his drink and the absolute ruins of his life. At 4 p.m., Nathaniel dialed into the emergency board meeting from his office in the penthouse, too afraid of the paparazzi swarming the building to attend in person. The screen flickered to life, displaying the grim faces of Oratech's 12 board members. At the head of the virtual table sat Harrison Gable, a ruthless, silver-haired venture capitalist who had backed Nathaniel in the early days. Gable did not suffer fools, and he certainly did not suffer liabilities. Let's skip the pleasantries, Nathaniel, Gable said, his voice vibrating with barely contained fury. The stock is down 62%. The FBI has seized our primary servers, and the SEC has formally notified us of a sweeping investigation into the executive suite. What the hell did you do? Harrison, I can explain, Nathaniel stammered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. It's a personal matter regarding my divorce that has been blown entirely out of proportion by an aggressive opposing counsel. I am handling it. Handling it? Gable barked, leaning into the camera. You committed perjury on a federal level to hide assets from your wife. You used company equity to fund an offshore shell corporation. That is not a personal matter, Nathaniel. That is embezzlement. That is fraud. You have made this company radioactive. I built this company, Nathaniel yelled, his temper flaring. Without me, Oratech is nothing. Without you, we might actually survive the week. A female board member interjected coldly. We've already been contacted by 3 major institutional shareholders demanding your immediate removal. If we don't act decisively today, they will initiate a hostile takeover and liquidate the assets. Gable nodded. The board convened an hour before this call. Nathaniel, we have taken a unanimous vote. Effective immediately, you are terminated as Chief Executive Officer of Oratech with cause. You are stripped of your seat on the board, and your remaining shares are frozen pending the outcome of the federal investigation. You can't do that, Nathaniel shouted, slamming his hand on his desk. I own 40% of the voting shares. I am the founder. Review your founder's agreement. Section 8, Clause B, Gable replied, his tone ice cold. In the event of an indictment or severe breach of fiduciary duty resulting in material harm to the company, the The board retains the right to strip the founder of voting power. You're out, Nathaniel. Security has already deactivated your building access and wiped your corporate devices. A press release announcing your termination will go out in exactly 5 minutes. The screen went black. The call was disconnected. Nathaniel sat in the agonizing silence of his home office. In the span of a single week, he had lost his wife, discovered a son he could not see, been betrayed by his mistress, lost his billion-dollar company, and was now staring down the barrel of a multi-year federal prison sentence. Meanwhile, 300 miles north in Portland, Chloe was sitting in her sunlit living room, nursing Leo. The television was on mute in the background, flashing breaking news banners over a B-roll footage of Nathaniel looking haggard and desperate outside his San Francisco building. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Olivia. "Tell me you're watching the news," Olivia said, her voice practically purring with satisfaction. Gable just threw him out of the airlock. The press release was brutal. They completely distanced themselves from him. "I saw," Chloe said softly, looking down at Leo's peaceful, sleeping face. "Is it over, Olivia?" "Not even close, my dear," Olivia replied. "Now comes the surgical strike. I just got off the phone with Harrison Gable." Chloe frowned, shifting Leo gently to her shoulder to burp him. "Why is the board calling you?" "Because they are desperate, Chloe. Oratech's PR is in a death spiral. They are being painted as a corrupt boys' club that allowed a CEO to steal millions to fund his mistress while hiding his pregnant wife. Gable knows that if they don't change the narrative immediately, the company will go bankrupt before the SEC even finishes their audit. And what do they want from me?" "They want absolution," Olivia explained. "Gable formally offered a settlement. They want to pay you the full $50 million you are owed from the marital assets, no questions asked, plus a public apology from the company. In exchange, they want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that the board had no knowledge of Nathaniel's actions, and they want you to publicly endorse the new interim CEO. They want you to save their company." Chloe was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window at the towering Oregon pines, thinking about the cramped apartment in San Jose, where she had written the very first lines of code for Oratech. She remembered the late nights, the cold coffee, the sheer brilliance of what she had created before Nathaniel had weaponized it for his own ego. "No," Chloe said, her voice hardening into steel. Olivia paused. "No? Chloe, $50 million is a massive offer. We could negotiate it to 75. "I don't care about the cash, Olivia," Chloe said, standing up and pacing the floor with Leo. "Nathaniel told me I was content playing house, that I didn't understand the arena he operated in. He thought I was weak. The board thinks they can write a check to make the aggrieved ex-wife go away. They are all wrong. What are you proposing?" Olivia asked, the professional curiosity evident in her tone. "Oratech is my code. It's my life's work," Chloe stated firmly. "Nathaniel ruined the culture, but the underlying technology is still revolutionary. Go back to Harrison Gable. Tell him I decline the cash settlement. Tell him I will drop my civil suit against the company, and I will publicly endorse Oratech to stabilize the stock. But my price isn't cash." "What is your price, Chloe?" "I want Nathaniel's frozen shares transferred entirely to me as restitution for the marital fraud," Chloe declared, her eyes burning with a fierce, protective light. "And I want his seat on the board. In fact, I want the title of Chief Technology Officer. They want PR absolution? The only way the public forgives Oratech is if the brilliant, wronged female co-founder returns to clean up the mess her corrupt ex-husband left behind." Olivia let out a low, impressed whistle. "That is a hostile takeover disguised as a divorce settlement. It's utterly ruthless, Chloe. Gable will fight it." "Gable has no leverage," Chloe reminded her. "The stock is dying. The institutional investors are bolting. I am a PR goldmine, and he knows it. Tell him he has 24 hours to draft the contracts, or I grant an exclusive, sit-down interview with the New York Times detailing exactly how incompetent the board was to miss $50 million walking out the back door." "I will make the call immediately," Olivia said, a fierce smile audible in her voice. I have to admit, Chloe, you play the game better than he ever did. Chloe hung up the phone. She looked down at Leo, who opened his vivid blue eyes and offered a gummy smile. She kissed his forehead. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was going back to Silicon Valley, not as a victim, but as a queen reclaiming her throne. Harrison Gable was a man who had made his fortune by recognizing leverage. Sitting in his glass-walled office overlooking Sand Hill Road, he stared at the speakerphone on his desk as Olivia Montgomery's ultimatum hung in the air. Next to him, Oratech's frantic general counsel, a man named David Aris, was furiously running the numbers on a legal pad. She wants the voting shares, Gable repeated, his voice dangerously low. She wants the frozen equity, the board seat, and the CTO title. She wants the keys to the kingdom, Olivia. She already built the kingdom, Harrison. Olivia's voice drifted back, crisp and unapologetic. Nathaniel just put his name on the gate. You and I both know that without Chloe's original algorithm, Oratech is just another bloated software interface. The Wall Street Journal is already preparing a devastating Sunday exposé on the board's lack of oversight. Bloomberg has analysts downgrading your stock to sell across the board. If Chloe walks away, the institutional investors will liquidate by Monday morning. You don't have a choice. Gable looked at Eris. The general counsel stopped writing, swallowed hard, and gave a slow, defeated nod. Draw up the paperwork, Gable grunted, rubbing his temples. We'll hold a press conference on Friday, but she better play the part, Olivia. If she gets in front of those cameras and throws the board under the bus, I will tie her up in civil litigation until that baby of hers is in college. Chloe doesn't need to throw you under the bus, Harrison, Olivia replied smoothly. Nathaniel already did that. Expect us in Silicon Valley in 48 hours. When Chloe Sterling finally returned to the sprawling, hyper-modern campus of Oratech, she didn't sneak in through the underground parking garage. She walked right through the main glass doors of the lobby, the exact same doors the FBI had swarmed just weeks prior. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal power suit, her head held high. Beside her, an executive assistant pushed a customized, sleek stroller carrying Leo, who was happily gripping a plush toy. The lobby fell completely silent. Dozens of engineers, developers, and marketing executives stopped in their tracks. They had only known Chloe as the quiet, reclusive wife who occasionally attended the holiday parties. Now, she was radiating an absolute, undisputed authority. Gable met her by the executive elevators, flanked by PR handlers. He extended a hand, forcing a tight, camera-ready smile. Welcome back to Oratech, Chloe. The board is eager to begin this new chapter. Thank you, Harrison, Chloe said, shaking his hand firmly. Let's get right to it. I want a full audit of the engineering department by noon, and I want Nathaniel's old office cleared out. The Italian leather sofas give me a headache. Replace them with functional workstations and a playpen. Over the next month, the transformation of Oratech was nothing short of miraculous. Chloe's return didn't just stabilize the stock, it galvanized the workforce. The engineers, who had spent years chafing under Nathaniel's marketing-heavy, style-over-substance leadership, suddenly found themselves led by one of their own, a brilliant coder, who actually understood the architecture of their product. The PR narrative spun by Forbes was irresistible. The betrayed founder returns to save the empire. Investors loved the redemption arc. The stock didn't just recover, it surged, breaking previous all-time highs as Chloe announced a massive overhaul of the software's core privacy protocols. Ironically, the exact protocols Nathaniel had exploited to hide his offshore accounts. As for Madeline Hayes, her immunity deal kept her out of a federal penitentiary, but it did not save her from the Internal Revenue Service. The DOJ had granted her a proffer against criminal conspiracy charges, but the IRS still viewed the $3 million Tuscan villa, the yacht, and the Malibu property as undeclared taxable income. Because the assets were seized as the proceeds of Nathaniel's corporate fraud, Madeline was left with a staggering, 7-figure tax bill she had no way of paying. Her reputation in Silicon Valley was radioactive. No tech firm would touch a strategy officer who had cooperated with the feds to bring down her own CEO. The last time Chloe saw Madeline's name, it wasn't in a boardroom memo. It was in a bleak article in a local San Francisco paper detailing how the former executive had declared Chapter 7 bankruptcy and was liquidating her designer wardrobe on consignment websites just to afford rent in Oakland. 18 months after the disastrous divorce hearing that collapsed his world, Nathaniel Sterling finally faced the music. The federal courthouse in San Francisco was a stark, imposing structure of concrete and cold steel, a far cry from the luxurious penthouses and Tuscan villas he was accustomed to. The courtroom was packed with journalists, defrauded shareholders, and curious onlookers. Nathaniel sat at the defense table, looking like a ghost of the billionaire darling he once was. His bespoke suits had been replaced by a baggy, standard-issue Navy suit that his court-appointed attorney had managed to procure. His hair was thinning, his face heavily lined with exhaustion and the terror of a man who had lost every ounce of control over his own destiny. Presiding over the case was Judge William Alsup, a notoriously strict federal judge who had zero patience for white-collar criminals who believed their wealth put them above the law. When it was time for sentencing, Nathaniel stood up, his hands trembling as he gripped the podium. He had prepared a statement, a final, desperate attempt to utilize the silver tongue that had built his empire. "Your Honor," Nathaniel began, his voice raspy and weak, "I acknowledge that I made severe errors in judgment. I was under immense pressure to maintain the illusion of absolute success. The money, I moved. It wasn't out of malice. It was a misguided attempt to protect my legacy. I have lost my company. I have lost my wife. I have a son, Leo, who is nearly 2 years old, and I have never even been allowed to hold him. I am a broken man. I beg the court for leniency, so that I might one day try to be a father to my child." In the gallery, Chloe sat perfectly still. She hadn't come to gloat. She had come to witness the final closure of this dark chapter. Hearing him use Leo's name as a bargaining chip for a lighter sentence only solidified the absolute disgust she felt for him. Judge Alsup looked down from the bench, his expression entirely unmoved. "Mr. Sterling," the judge's voice boomed through the microphone, "you did not make an error in judgment. You engaged in a calculated, protracted campaign of deceit. You committed perjury in a state family court to defraud your wife of her rightful marital assets. You committed severe securities fraud to lie to the shareholders who trusted you with their investments. You used corporate funds as your personal piggy bank to fund illicit affairs." The judge leaned forward, his eyes boring into the disgraced CEO. "You speak of your son. It is the finding of this court, and the evidence presented, that you attempted to leave the mother of your child with a fraction of what she was owed, fully intending to abandon your marital responsibilities. You do not get to use the child you tried to discard as a shield against federal prison. Your hubris is matched only by your greed." Judge Alsup picked up a stack of papers. "On the charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and felony perjury, I sentence you to 96 months in a federal penitentiary, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay an additional $12 million in restitution to the SEC. Court is adjourned." The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed in Nathaniel's ears, sounding exactly like the gavel strike at his divorce hearing. Federal marshals immediately moved in, instructing Nathaniel to place his hands behind his back. The clicks of the handcuffs were loud in the hushed courtroom. As they led him toward the side door to be transported to FCI Lompoc, a medium-security federal prison, Nathaniel turned his head, his panicked eyes scanning the gallery until they locked onto Chloe. She didn't look away. She didn't smile, and she didn't frown. She simply looked at him with the calm, detached pity one might reserve for a stranger. Then, she turned around, walked out the heavy wooden doors, and stepped into the bright, California sunlight. 2 years later, The shadow of Nathaniel Sterling was nothing more than a cautionary tale taught in business ethics classes at Stanford. Oratech was thriving. Under Chloe's leadership as CEO, the company had pivoted toward ethical AI and data privacy, securing massive government contracts and restoring investor faith completely. The toxic, frat house culture Nathaniel had cultivated was entirely eradicated. It was a late Friday afternoon, and the executive suites at Oratech were quiet. Chloe sat behind her desk, a simple, elegant glass table, reviewing the final quarterly reports. The numbers were flawless. The door to her office pushed open, and a little boy with a mop of dark hair and piercing, vivid blue eyes came barreling into the room, giggling uncontrollably. Close behind him was Olivia Montgomery, who had recently accepted a position as Oratech's chief legal counsel. "Mama!" Leo shouted, holding up a finger painting covered in vibrant streaks of blue and green. Chloe's corporate persona instantly melted away. She dropped her pen, kneeling down on the carpet to catch her son as he crashed into her arms. She buried her face in his neck, inhaling the sweet scent of his shampoo, her heart swelling with an overwhelming, protective love. "Look at this masterpiece," Chloe smiled, taking the painting and kissing his cheek. "This is going right on the refrigerator." "He is a menace," Olivia laughed, straightening her skirt as she walked in. "He managed to charm the entire legal department out of their afternoon snacks." Chloe stood up, lifting Leo onto her hip. She looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Silicon Valley skyline. She had lost her marriage, but she had gained the world. She had protected her son, reclaimed her life's work, and proven that the quiet architect in the background could become the most powerful player on the board. Nathaniel had tried to hand her a $20 million severance package to disappear. Instead, she had taken his company, his legacy, and his future. "Are we ready for the weekend?" Olivia asked, glancing at the reports on the desk. "We are," Chloe said, looking at her son's bright, happy eyes. The sterling blue eyes that used to bring her pain now only brought her immense joy, because they belonged entirely to Leo. "We have absolutely everything we need." The dramatic unraveling of Nathaniel Sterling serves as a stark reminder that empires built on deceit are destined to collapse. Chloe's journey from a heartbroken, discarded wife to a formidable CEO highlights the incredible power of resilience and maternal instinct. She didn't just survive the devastating betrayal of her marriage. She weaponized her brilliant mind and legal strategy to completely dismantle the corrupt corporate structure her ex-husband had created. While Nathaniel's greed ultimately led him to a federal prison cell, stripped of his wealth and his title, Chloe reclaimed her narrative. She secured a thriving future for her son, Leo, and proved that true power doesn't lie in flashy PR or ruthless manipulation, but in quiet competence, unwavering integrity, and the fierce determination to protect what is rightfully yours.